My friends, let me ask you something that most people will spend the rest of their lives carefully avoiding. You built everything, you crossed oceans, you worked in kitchens that were not yours, lived in apartments that barely fit your body, sent money home before you ever spent a dollar on yourself. You raised children who now live in cities with their own mortgages, their own opinions, their own version of history, a version in which you appear mostly as a warning. And tonight you are sitting somewhere quiet, maybe watching your phone, maybe not, and somewhere underneath the routine of your day is a question you have trained yourself not to finish. Why does it feel like I am disappearing? I am not going to tell you it is your fault. I am also not going to tell you it is your children's fault. I am going to tell you something far more difficult than blame. I am going to tell you the truth about what actually happens when a parent gives everything, and what it costs both the giver and the one who receives. Because in 30 years of watching families built and broken across Taipei and Hong Kong, across the San Gabriel Valley and Flushing, and the Richmond district of San Francisco, I have seen the same story play out with the same ending, in house after house, generation after generation. And the tragedy is not that the children are ungrateful. The tragedy is that the parents train them to be. Now, before you close this and go back to waiting for a call that may not come tonight, hear me out, because what I am about to say is going to challenge everything you were taught about what it means to love a child. Let us begin with the foundation. You come from a generation that was told sacrifice is love, that love means emptying yourself completely into another person, that the measure of a parent's worth is how little they kept for themselves. This was not a weakness, this was survival logic passed down through centuries of scarcity. When your grandparents lived through war, through famine, through the long humiliations of colonial history, they learned one fundamental truth: the individual must be sacrificed for the continuation of the family line. The self was a luxury, the child was the investment was the future, and so you inherited this logic. You wore it like a second skin. When your children were born, you did not see a separate human being with their own destiny. You saw the vessel through which your suffering would finally be justified. Every sacrifice you made would find its meaning in them. Every humiliation you swallowed, every dream you postponed, every luxury you denied yourself, it would all be redeemed the moment your child stood on a stage and received a diploma, or bought a house, or made a life that looked, from the outside, like success. This is not a criticism. This is what love looked like in your world. I want you to understand that. But here is the problem, and it is a catastrophic one. The world your children inhabit does not speak the same language as the world that shaped you. The contract you are operating under, sacrifice now, receive gratitude later, was written for a society that no longer exists. The economy that made sacrifice rational has been replaced by one that rewards individual performance. The culture that enforced filial duty has been diluted by decades of Western education, Western entertainment, Western individualism. Your children were raised inside two contradictory worlds simultaneously. They ate your cooking and absorbed your work ethic at home. They went to school and were told that their first obligation was to themselves. This is not betrayal. This is dissonance. And dissonance, left unaddressed, always resolves itself in the direction of the dominant culture. The dominant culture told your children they owe you nothing beyond basic decency. You told them, through every action of your life, that they owe you everything. Someone had to lose that argument, and in most homes I have seen, silently over years, it was you. Now, I want to talk about what actually destroys these relationships. Not the surface arguments, not the disputes about money or about when to visit or about how to raise the grandchildren. Those are symptoms. The disease is something deeper, and it has 3 stages. The first stage is what I call the invisible transaction. Every gift you gave your child, every tuition payment, every down payment on a house, every red envelope, every sacrifice of your retirement money, came with an unspoken price tag that you never disclosed, and they never agreed to. The price was this: one day, you would need them, and they would be there. Not because of legal obligation, not because of guilt, but because love, real love, remembers what was given, and finds a way to return it. But you never said this out loud. You said it was unconditional. You said you wanted nothing in return, and they believed you. Because children, when they are young, have no reason not to believe their parents. So they took the gifts, they accepted the help, and, in accepting it freely, without obligation, they never built the muscle of reciprocity. You gave them fish every day and called it love, and they never learned to feel the weight of the net. By the time they were adults with their own bills, their own exhaustion, their own children pulling at them, the invisible debt you had been accumulating for decades was simply invisible to them. It did not register, not because they are monsters, because you never made it visible. And when you finally needed something back, when you called too often, when you showed up uninvited, when you made your loneliness known, they did not experience it as a reasonable return on investment. They experienced it as an imposition, as a new demand from a parent who had always told them they were free. This is the first wound, and it runs very deep. The second stage is what I call the authority vacuum. There is a particular kind of parent who gives everything financially and controls everything emotionally, who pays for the child's education and then insists on choosing the major, who funds the wedding and then inserts themselves into the marriage, who babysits the grandchildren and then reparents them according to rules that belong to another era. I have sat across from elderly men and women who genuinely cannot understand why their children seem to resent them. They list their sacrifices like evidence in a court case. They enumerate every dollar spent, every flight taken, every night spent on a fold-out cot in a small apartment to save on hotels. And they ask me, why is this not enough? And I tell them, as gently as I can, because money was never what your children needed most from you. What they needed, what every child of an overgiving parent needs, is the experience of solving their own problems, of making their own mistakes, of carrying the weight of their own lives without someone rushing in to remove it. When you paid off their debt, you stole from them the knowledge of their own capability. When you arrived to help without being asked, you told them without words that you did not believe they could manage without you. When you criticized their choices while still funding them, you created a person trapped between dependence and resentment, unable to fully leave, unable to fully stay. That person is not going to treat you with warmth. That person is going to be irritable and distant and vaguely guilty in a way they cannot name every time they see you, because you are the mirror in which they see their own incompleteness. And that is a painful thing to look at. The third stage is the one that breaks the most hearts. I call it the collapsing identity. When your children were young, your identity was clear. You were the provider, the protector, the source of all stability. You had a function, and your function gave you dignity. But your children grew up, and gradually, imperceptibly, your function was no longer needed. They could earn their own money. They could fix their own problems. They could even raise their own children. And as each of those functions was replaced by their capability, by their independence, by the life they built without you, something inside you began to hollow out, because you had built your entire sense of self on the role of parent, not on who you were before children, not on what you loved, what you dreamed, what made you interesting to yourself. You had dismantled that person piece by piece over decades and replaced them entirely with the role of mother or father. And now the role had been reduced, and you had nothing else to stand in. So you reached back toward your children. You called more than they could answer. You needed more than they could give. Not because you were demanding, but because you were frightened. Because without their attention, you were not sure you existed, and they felt the weight of that. The specific weight of being someone's only reason for living. And they did what any living thing does when it feels the pressure of being someone's oxygen. They pulled back to breathe. I have told you the mechanism of the wound. Now I am going to tell you the only cure that actually works. And it is not a strategy, it is not a technique, it is a fundamental reorientation of the self. You have to become someone again, not someone's parent. Someone. A person with a life so full, so interesting, so genuinely their own, that your children have to schedule time to see you. A person whose phone is sometimes busy when they call. A person who has opinions about things that have nothing to do with the family. A person who travels, who learns, who fails at new things, who laughs about it, and who, when their children arrive, is too alive to be a burden. I have watched this transformation happen. I have seen a woman in her 70s who had spent 3 years weeping in a Flushing apartment, waiting for a son who never came, become a woman who took up ballroom dancing and started writing a food blog in English, her second language, because she had things to say, and she was tired of waiting for permission. Within 6 months, her son was calling her, not out of guilt, out of curiosity, because she had become someone he did not fully know, and people, even adult children, are drawn toward lives that are being actively lived. The lesson is not complicated, but it requires something most people in your generation were never taught to do. It requires you to matter to yourself, not as a parent, not as a sacrifice, not as a collection of things you gave up for others, as a person, as the full, complicated, irreplaceable human being you were before anyone ever needed you. Here is the broader truth I want you to carry with you. The relationship between a parent and an adult child is one of the most misunderstood structures in human culture. We treat it as an extension of early childhood, as if the rules that governed the first 20 years should continue to govern the next 50. But the family is a living system, and living systems must evolve, or they calcify. The parent who cannot release the parental role becomes a ghost haunting a house the children have already left. They wander through rooms that no longer belong to them, making demands the new occupants cannot honor, wondering why no one sees them. The parent who releases the role, who steps back, builds their own world, and offers their children a relationship of equals, rather than a ledger of debts, becomes something far more rare and far more valuable. They become a person their children choose to know, not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because somewhere in the architecture of who that parent became, there is a person worth knowing, a person with wisdom earned through genuine experience, a person with scars that tell real stories, a person who has chosen, late in life, to be alive. That is the parent the child calls. That is the parent the child drives across the city to see, not because they have to, because they want to, because they feel, in that person's presence, something rare in the modern world, an encounter with a life fully lived. Stop waiting to be needed. Start living to be known. Stop emptying yourself so your children can fill themselves. The overflow of a full life is worth more than the offering of an empty one. You have survived things that would have broken most people. You have crossed oceans and outlasted hardships and built something real from nothing. That person, the one who did all of that, is still inside you, and they have been waiting, quietly, for the part of the story where they finally get to live for themselves. This is that part. The second half of your life will not be saved by sacrifice. It will be saved by the radical, difficult, deeply unfamiliar act of becoming yourself. And when you do, when you stop performing the role of the parent who needs and start inhabiting the life of the person who thrives, you will find, with a certainty that surprises you, that your children begin to move toward you, not because you changed the rules of the transaction, because you ended the transaction entirely. And what replaced it, what, finally, genuinely replaced it, was something neither of you had ever quite managed before, a relationship between two free people. If this reached something in you that has been quiet for a long time, sit with it, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the best time to start living for yourself was 30 years ago. The second best time is now.